Cool. Can you hear us clear?
Yeah, nice and clear. Are you guys turning on your camera?
Some of us might. My own camera, I mean, right now we have very bad internet connection down here in Saigon. And when we did the test half an hour ago, it was a bit shaky. That's why I probably will keep it off. The guys who have a better connection might be able to turn it on. Where are you now?
No worries at all.
Where are you right now?
I'm in Condal. So actually, I'm very close to you, just a 1 hour flight away. I'll be in Saigon tomorrow. So maybe next week we can catch up.
Hope to see you around at the meetup next week. We will have some falafel, hummus, and so on at our usual meetup spot. Yeah, it looks to me right now, we have now 8 p.m. The stream should be online from all together. That we are missing Steve.
Okay.
Now it's 7 a.m. in Alberta, and I heard from him somehow that the calendar invite didn't reach him, and we tried to send him another one, and I'm not sure if it reached him in time. So it might be that you have your solo tonight.
Okay.
That's why we have to plan. Having no single point of failure pays off again. The decentralization matters also, that you have enough guests all over the world.
Right. So can you hear me clear as well, by the way?
I can hear you very well, yes.
That's perfect.
Okay, then maybe let's start really now with a proper introduction here. I will maybe just start for now, like what this meetup is about, what it came about, and then hand over to you and also like the other moderators which we have on here. So that's our second Bitcoin Saigon online meetup. The ideas to the online meetups kind of were born, I mean, as everybody knows, we had like this whole Corona situation here in Vietnam. For those of you who are not in Vietnam, Vietnam has handled this whole situation very, very well overall. We have, I think, something like 350 confirmed cases or something, 0 confirmed deaths from Corona. Make out of it what you want, but the point is that Vietnam locally has fully opened up again since about a month. Normal life resumed like before, apart from like tourism, which at the moment is of course still down, given that the borders remain closed for the time being. But otherwise, normal life is more or less back. We have also our regular offline meetups every week back since early May. But at the same time, we also decided we keep these online meetups kind of going, invite some interesting guests to talk about interesting topics in and around Bitcoin, and also give people, given that a few of our community members are now stuck in other countries around the world, Croatia, Argentina, and a couple of other places, can't be with us for the coming months, that they can participate in community activities this way. Myself, Dominic, originally from Frankfurt, got into Bitcoin late 2012, early 2013, one of the community founders over there, made my move out of Europe in early 2014. Later on that started here with a few other guys, also the local Bitcoin community down here in Saigon in Vietnam. Professionally also doing Bitcoin stuff. We launched also the first Bitcoin exchange here in 2014, which is still operating and running. If you want to check this out, bitcoinvn.io right now, domain. Couple of services there, but yeah, don't want to go too much into detail there yet. Yeah, okay, then maybe the other guys on the stream first, and then we go to you, Thomas, as our guest of the night. Chris, Daniel. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, it's Chris here. I'm in Da Nang, and I organize Bitcoin meetups. And yeah, I help you out a little bit also to get this done today. I have some questions later regarding mining. And yeah, that's maybe that, you know.
Okay, hi, my name is Daniel. I'm a member of the Saigon Bitcoin community been living in Vietnam for 3 years now, and yeah, looking forward to this meetup.
Fabulous. So maybe I'll quickly introduce myself. So I'm Thomas. I'm originally from Australia, but I've spent the last few years working abroad in Hong Kong and China. So I'm currently working at F2 Pool, which is a large mining pool. And just by chance, I've actually been spending the past 4 months in Vietnam. So I've been all over. I've been in Hanoi, Saigon, Da Nang, and now in Con Dao. Just funny timing, fortunate or unfortunate. So I was applying for a new Australian passport and Chinese visa just as the coronavirus pandemic kind of got very serious. So I've been staying here, and I actually feel very fortunate because it's been very safe and the people have been very hospitable. And just over the last few months, I've been chatting with the guys here, and yeah, looking forward to tonight's event.
Yeah, all right. Seems like Steve is joining us also in a bit. He already turned up on Telegram. So I guess we're just figuring out how to get him on Jitsi.
We also have, I think, Tomo on here if he wants to say something or if he wants to remain calm. Is also one of the early community members, was at the very first meetup. Tomo? Yeah, don't know. Maybe he's still busy eating or something. Yeah, so Steve should also be around shortly. He's definitely awake. So yeah, I think if we can kind of a bit stretch this, talking about some more Vietnam-related topics, maybe. Steve also was at the Crypto Econ in Hanoi, organized by Eric Woskyle in February 2020, late February 2020. Almost like a different time, was like kind of the last, possibly the last Bitcoin conference, international one, before like really the crisis broke out. Which was a very nice event. Eric Woskyle was, of course, suffering also already with like the increasing travel restrictions. So the conference had a lot of improvisation, which they had to do to keep the schedule up. But yeah, good anyway to move forward with this conference, which Eric put on there. And there he is.
Hey guys.
Hey, we are still in like
Hello.
kind of the introduction round. We just talked a bit about the Crypto Econ Hanoi. There's Steve. And now maybe you just want to say, what are you doing in the Bitcoin world and why?
What I'm doing, I own a Bitcoin mining service provider company. I mainly focus on building Bitcoin mining data centers for oil field applications. So basically what I mean is like mainly waste gas or stranded gas in oil field. So we basically help oil and gas producers monetize their waste energy by deploying Bitcoin mines. You can hear me, right?
Nice.
Yeah.
Yes, was one of the more interesting talks, definitely also at the Crypto Econ in Hanoi. I think Steve was flying out more or less right after. How's the situation these days in Canada up there, Steve?
Dismal. Terrible. The economy is terrible. But so is it pretty much everywhere. So, but the oil and gas economy is really bad. I don't know if you guys follow oil prices, but
yeah, we just talked. The local economy more or less fully opened up again since like early May. I think like taking their early action and being prepared of anything what is coming out there of China, that certainly helped here to have everything.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. I think Dominic is gone for a second. Anyway, we are waiting for a couple more people to join. I think Tomo is coming. Yeah, yeah, that's the Jitsi technology. We are just trying to use it today. Some technical problems sometimes.
So I was like late, right? Or has this been going for an hour?
No, that's probably just some more people joining, but yeah, Dominic had some small problems earlier, so we might just have to do it, I guess, a round of helping out.
I think
Yeah.
I'm back now. Can you guys hear me again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's a bit tricky, but also like on the moderator side, we work with no single points of failure. That's why we have a few guys from us online in case something like this happens. I mean, supposedly the news says the undersea cable is somehow broken again. That's why the connection from Vietnam is a bit shaky. But yeah, hope that we can get through this more or less tonight. Did I miss any points, or are you guys?
No, we were just wondering where you went and talked about
Okay.
you.
Have to check it out later on YouTube. Okay, and then maybe after this intro round, let's get a bit more into the questions. How did you guys the first time get into Bitcoin? What sparked your interest? And also, like, why did you decide basically that this is a good move to focus your career on?
Thomas, you want to go?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned earlier, I've been living abroad for a couple of years. So I was working in China in early 2017, and just by chance, I was introduced to Bitcoin. And back in those days, even though it's not early in the grand scheme of things, back in those days, it was very primitive. My friend showed me her mobile phone and had an app called Huobi, which is now one of the world's biggest exchanges. But back then, it was very funny. It was, I think, a Chinese-only interface. And she showed me how easy it was to convert renminbi to Bitcoin. And just from that, I was very curious because it was actually very useful for me moving funds in different places and just going deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole. And then in 2018, learning more, and then I was introduced to Wang Chun, who is the co-founder of F2 Pool, and we became friends. And then he asked me if I would be interested to work at the company. At that time, which was end of 2018, I didn't know too much about mining. You know, mining is a fascinating part of the industry, but you know, it's still a black hole in some respects. There's a lot to learn, and it's hard to get this information. But the following months was just all about networking, understanding how the industry works from the economic side, tech side, business side, and just really found that mining is probably the most interesting business built on Bitcoin today because of all the various tangible elements there are. And I mean, just like everyone on the call, found reasons to love Bitcoin and use it. So that's my story in a nutshell.
I agree. Mining is definitely the most interesting part of Bitcoin. Hardware is way cooler than software, right?
Yeah.
Well, I guess I got into it I started my company in 2017, and I learned about Bitcoin in 2016. I had recently quit my career job, I guess, as an engineer at an oil company, and I was pursuing like doing downhole tools and stuff. And what I mean by that is like designing downhole tools and selling them and manufacturing them and selling them. That was actually going all right, but I was learning about Bitcoin at the time because I had a lot of downtime in that period, and finally decided I should learn about this because I keep hearing about it. And really, for me, the first thing that fascinated me was the mining aspect because I thought it was really odd that you could just plug computers in they would do calculations and then you'd earn money. So I thought that was weird. So I had to discover why that was. And then, then you realize, well, they consume a ton of energy. So, well, I'm coming from a part of an industry where we have these huge energy problems, primarily with this, stranded gas. So the beautiful thing about Bitcoin, of course, is it's a demand on energy basically wherever it is. So I started trying to figure out, well, this seems like it solves this problem that we've had for a long, long time in the oil field, this whole Bitcoin mining thing. So I just started looking around, who's doing it? Like, why isn't any of my suppliers like offering me a Bitcoin mine or something like to place on oil wells? No one seemed to be doing it, so I just went out and built the first one, or our first one, and sort of just been slowly growing the company since.
Especially now with like the recent troubles around the oil price. I mean, we had like, I think it was last month where first time ever negative oil prices when like the futures settled. Did you see around these situations increasing demand for like your mines? That, I mean, given that some of these oil fields, I mean, they need to keep running because shutting them down is more expensive than keeping them running. But to actually make something out of the energy produced up there, then rather just burning the money.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting. I mean, I don't want to see the oil price go down because it sort of has a couple of effects. Like the main thing is that when the prices are down and nobody's making money in oil field, which is the case right now, they have no money to spend. So a lot of the contracts, for example, I had in place before this downturn are now sort of delayed or just canceled altogether because they basically just they don't have the capital basically to go try out something new. That being said, we've actually still been getting sales, even though sales is slower because the prices are down. Not just it's the oil prices are down, but mining revenue is tighter, right? So it makes the payouts a little bit more difficult. But what we are getting is our Bitcoin mines. Like there's a period of time right now, like the oil price, if you're looking at it, it's gone back up a little bit. So some local producers for sure have started turning their wells back on, but like a month ago, for example, where nobody was making any money at all, and it's still pretty much that bad. Like a lot of guys haven't started any of their wells up. They're actually looking at our Bitcoin mines and saying, well, these are the only things right now that make money, because obviously the mining is completely independent of the oil price, so and the gas price. So if they're producing an oil well and they have waste gas, well, that gas is still worth what it was worth before. It's still worthwhile in some cases running that well to run the Bitcoin mine, even though the oil side of things like isn't profitable. They can just shut that in. We have actually one case where a producer's doing that. They have an oil well that they've shut in because it's not profitable, but there's enough gas coming off the casing that they can still run our Bitcoin mine. So that's what they're doing. It's actually technically, I don't know if it's technically legal, but that's what they're doing because they're all desperate right now just to basically stay afloat. So it's sort of interesting because I've been actually getting a lot. Like the amount of cold calls we get from producers hasn't really slowed down, and in fact, it's sort of picked up a little bit because I think more and more of them are talking about this because it, like I said, it's the only thing for a period of time anyway that's making any money.
That's interesting that this can serve kind of as a hedge against like the energy price fluctuations there. So from the last point you said, I get that they actually utilize now the energy partially just really to mine the Bitcoins and just piling it up there. nobody's buying it right now with the economy in chatters.
Yeah, no, pretty much. It's I mean, the equipment they have, they might as well keep running because it's pretty low OpEx. The mining and oil field's all about CapEx. It's a lot more CapEx than your typical installation, your Bitcoin mine, because you have to, someone's got to buy a genset like a power plant. So it's highly capital intensive. It's extremely low operating intensive or OpEx intensive.
Right now, you're mostly operating in Canada, North America, right? Do you have any clients outside North America at this point?
Yeah, we're in Canada and the US.
Okay. Then getting back also a bit to Thomas, did you guys, you are like kind of all over the world. I've seen like F2 Pool is like engaged in like mining farms in Iceland, in China, wherever energy is basically plenty. Did you guys see any changes in the business demand around like the recent energy price crashes basically?
I would say that the recent oil price crashes had limited impact to F2 Pool. So we do have clients all over the world. But as Steve said, there's a bunch of miners in Canada and also US in Texas who are using the stranded gas. Some of our clients are, but they're still able to operate as normal as of right now. Definitely would say the bigger impacts to the mining industry and the miners, there was some small impacts, I would say, in February and March for supply chain, for buying new machines because of the coronavirus. And on March 12th, with the big price drop, as Steve also mentioned, the margins, the mining revenue is much tighter recently. So the amount of Bitcoin or dollars per terahash you can make. So that had a big impact. And then, of course, the halving recently on May 11th, that just shakes up the mining industry a little bit. So definitely seeing who's efficient and who's inefficient and who can survive the longest. So those are probably the biggest impacts we had recently.
Yeah, let's get into these more Bitcoin specific economic parts a bit later in the call. But regarding like the discussion which we have about like real world energy usage to mine like these fancy weird internet stuff, and one of the opposing voices you always then hear is about like, oh, these Bitcoin miners are boiling the oceans and we need to stop all of this because the climate and whatever. As two guys who are working in the industry, what's your take on this? And what would you respond to the people who have concerns about Bitcoin mining ruining things for everybody?
Okay. I might share some things outside of North America. I'm sure Steve knows that better than me, but actually in China and in Russia, there is huge mining farms that are hydro-powered, okay? Especially in China, in Sichuan and Yunnan, which reports suggest take up around 40 to 60% of the overall Bitcoin network hash rate. So they're hydro-powered, which is very positive. In other parts of Asia, so Kazakhstan. So in Kazakhstan, they're primarily coal-powered mining farms, and you get some coal-powered in Xinjiang in China and also in Russia. But I would say it's definitely a misconception. It's definitely huge numbers of these mining farms are using renewable sources of power. What about you, Steve, in North America? What do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I'll add to that because, like, regardless of what the energy source is, one thing we all have in common across the globe is we're using the cheapest energy that we can find, and if we don't, we can't stay in business. And the reason it's cheap is because nobody wants it. This isn't energy that's highly demanded, that's you're competing at your home for. This is energy that is usually surplus, like Thomas said, it's going to flow down the river unless they harness it anyway. So I've never seen that argument to have that much weight, although a lot of people do. A lot of people that don't think critically sort of latch onto that. And then, you know, another part about that argument that bothers me is, you know, the value of anything is of course subjective. People claim that Bitcoin mining, you know, it uses a lot of energy, therefore it's a waste. It might be a waste to them because they don't value Bitcoin, but there's a whole, you know, host of people. There's millions of people around the world that do value Bitcoin, and to say that what they value is a waste is sort of ridiculous. It's pretty hypocritical, because we don't go around saying, you know, anything we don't use, whatever it is a waste if it's useful to that person. So it's sort of just a ridiculous argument on its face. But I mean, like, adding to what he's doing, what he was talking about with the renewables, like we're talking with a solar company right now in Canada, and they're pretty serious about deploying Bitcoin mines on their solar fields because of the curtailed power that they have to deal with sometimes. Whether that'll fly right now or not, we're still trying to determine. But you see that more and more. Like I know mostly North American mining. I'm not as familiar as Thomas with everything overseas, but like in Texas, there's a lot going on down there, where they're, at least the narrative around the big mining farms that are going up down there is about help regulating the call it the load, like regulating the load on the power on the grid. There's a lot of wind power in Texas. There's a lot of solar, and it's an unregulated energy grid. So it's a way to switch on mining when needed, when there's this surplus curtailed energy coming from all these renewables, which is of course inherently a flaw of renewables. They generate power when they do, and it does not necessarily when it's needed. So that's why a Bitcoin mining can be a demand on that energy. So if anything, I think all of the facts and all of the, and you know, look at what we do and what's going on in oil field. Everyone's using it on mostly waste gas that's just being burned anyway, right? So I think if you look at all the facts, everything is pointing to Bitcoin mining being like the greenest technology the world's ever seen. That's the way I see it.
One of the arguments more from the Bitcoin side, and there'll be some way to it, and that's why I think should also ask you as the experts on this matter, is that Bitcoin actually fosters the green energy revolution by making, like, I mean, as you said, like a lot of the renewables are very, dependent seasonal on, like, if the sun is shining or if the rain is coming, or what else do we have? If the wind is blowing. So it's not as simple like your coal, gas, nuclear power plant, which you kind of just turn on and kind of you can keep it constant. So can Bitcoin mining help basically making these renewable power plants running more efficient, making more money by mining Bitcoins when they have some surplus, and therefore make them more investable, because they just don't have to waste the energy but get actually Bitcoins out of it when they are having a good run and it's very windy outside, but they can't put enough into the grid in short time frame. So basically, does Bitcoin mining help the green energy revolution, however you want to call it, by making it possible to utilize those sources which otherwise are harder to manage with the electricity demand from the grid?
So I think it's definitely a net positive. One of the reasons why there is this concept of a wet season or hydro season in China is because the Chinese government is actually delivering a project right now, which is to move large amounts of power from the west part of China to the east part of China. So it's actually a real life project that's happening. And it's just so that these Bitcoin mines can use this power for the next couple of years until the project is completed, which otherwise would be wasted. And then that, by having these large data centers or Bitcoin mining farms in Sichuan, it actually brings a lot of money to the local economy. And it's very interesting because, you know, every year we hear news about the Chinese government banning Bitcoin mining or banning Bitcoin as a whole, right? We even had news last week, and a lot of people were discussing it. But that's just on the surface level, but underneath there is so much good stuff happening. These data centers are consuming the power, the renewable energies, and this money then goes into the local economy, which then helps to support the projects. So for me, it's clearly a net positive overall.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine why. I mean, yeah, like we always hear as well, like the Chinese government wants to ban Bitcoin. It seems like it's been so good for the Chinese people. It's like, why would you want to do that? But you know, what were we talking? What was the question? It was,
does Bitcoin help for renewable adoption and renewable?
Yeah, renewables, right? Yeah. So I have a bit of a, I guess, contrary, a bit of a different opinion on it, because most people will say yes, it certainly does, and I think it does too. I think the way I look at it is, if you have a project, an existing project, and more specifically solar and wind, not necessarily hydro, because hydro is a renewables, a form of renewable energy that is, I think, a very effective form of energy, because it's not as finicky. You know, if you don't have no power output from a hydro dam, you usually have at least, you know, some base load, whereas you can have days where there's no wind and the sun output is very low for solar. So I find with the wind and solar idea anyway, Bitcoin is certainly, if you have an existing project that you've already sunk the capital in and built it out, I think Bitcoin mining does offer a very attractive option for them, especially as these ASICs are getting cheaper. Like S9s, obviously, they're close to obsolescence, but they're super cheap. So it's, you know, at least on the CapEx side, to go deploy a couple Bitcoin mines on an existing solar field, it's not a ton of money anymore. It used to be a lot more money a few years ago, where you couldn't really get a large scale deployment of ASICs at a super cheap price, where you can now. So that plays a huge factor, because in these a lot of these renewable plays, it really only makes sense if you're using it when they have that surplus that they can't sell, and then you're obviously shutting it off when they can sell it, because they're always going to sell it into the grid when they can, assuming they get a higher price for it. And of course, when you sort of zoom out further, certainly in North America, I can't really speak for overseas, but in North America, most of these renewable projects like wind and solar, they're highly subsidized by the government. And the reason that they're subsidized by the government is because they're trying to create clean energy alternatives, which I could argue is whether it's how clean it is or not. But putting, at least the narrative behind putting that out there, is to displace fossil fuels. So the goal is to, you know, they're injecting taxpayer capital into these projects to displace fossil fuels. So they have to really be successful, they have to displace fossil fuels. So meaning whenever the power is available to send to the grid, they need to be doing that. So to say whether Bitcoin mining will help, maybe let's say just North American renewables displace fossil fuels, it's hard to say. I think that you know, it's not likely anyone's going to build a renewable project for Bitcoin mining, and not anytime soon. The reason they do it right now, and the reason they get the subsidies, is to displace fossil fuels. So that's sort of the expectation. So Bitcoin mining doesn't really help that, aside from helping the bottom line of the project, you know, pay out. So in a sense it does, but in another sense it doesn't. So I would say net though, I would say it's definitely good for renewable projects that are existing. I'm not so certain yet if it's really that interesting to go justify building more.
Okay, I get one more question here to this complex of like energy generation and how Bitcoin mining fits in there. In case the other guys have anything, then also feel free still to jump in. A bit more like funny one, maybe, I don't know. The Belarusian President Lukashenko, like a few months ago, was announcing that they are going to use nuclear power plants to mine Bitcoins. which got quite a bit of attention in like the Bitcoin community. What do you guys, as somebody working on the front lines, think about this? And is this any viable idea or just nonsense?
I don't really have a strong views, but I think the key point is it's such a competition to find cheaper power. So that's one of the main drivers for a successful operation. Once you've paid the capex, you've got your opex, which is mostly electricity price and labor costs. So I don't know how true it is, but if they're able to do it in an efficient way, they will definitely do that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. If it's if whatever project they're speculating on is actually, you know, going to be competitive, then they don't need to announce anything. They don't really need to do anything. Bitcoin miners will you know, flock there if it's a great project. So that's the nice thing. We're also hungry for finding cheap options. You don't have to do a lot of marketing if you just if you can just say what your price is. You're going to get, and it's exciting. You're going to get a lot of people calling you, right? So.
I mean, this idea from Lukashenko certainly also ties in a bit with like that these rogue nations, as it's often then called in like international politics, look for a way out of like the stranglehold of like the US dollar dominated international transfer system, where it might also just make strategic sense for them to have a strong foothold in there. What's your general take about like these countries, like also Iran? We heard stories that they are getting more active on this. We always hear that the North Koreans have like all these hacker groups targeting the exchanges to accumulate Bitcoin. What's your take on this? That this Bitcoin plays there also a more geostrategic role, which might make it interesting for like nations to get a position in there.
I don't have any kind of credible data to suggest as such, but I think it's a no-brainer for, I think starting from individual people, I think to put aside like a very small amount of your funds, and I mean very small, like 0.5% or even less, to buy Bitcoin is a strategic, smart decision. But then even at the country level, I have no doubt that there's multiple governments across the world who are accumulating Bitcoin, and you know, mining is one of the best ways to accumulate Bitcoin. So I don't have any credible data on it, but would not be surprised. I mean, definitely there's a lot of mining operations in Iran. I think Iran goes back and forth about the legality of it, but I think definitely there's a significant amount of mining there, and same in Russia, as you mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the use case for Bitcoin, one of the, you know, the biggest use cases is to be able to just transact permissionlessly, like sensor resistance. So if any of these, I think it more applies to people rather than governments, but governments generally do not benefit from like this hard sound money as they do from their fiat money that they can print. So in some ways, but then there's of course certain states that don't have exactly that luxury, and maybe that applies to Iran. I'm not sure, but you know, I think it's you know, and also one thing to look at is in terms of scale, like Bitcoin is actually still pretty small. Like the mining revenue right now is about $10 million a day. $9 to $10 million a day is the total. If you just look at the total value of the mined revenue, it's about $9 to $10 million a day. It's not a lot of money. It's a lot of money for, you know, a relatively small industry of Bitcoin miners. But like when we're talking at the state level, like countries, that's not a lot of money. So that's not. I don't think it's big enough to act as a significant tool for, let's say, a country that might be trying to circumvent, you know, I don't know if they're trying to hedge or just circumvent, you know, U.S. sanctions or something. Not to say it's not useful to some degree to them, but it'll become a lot more useful the bigger it gets. So but yes, that is what it is. It's a tool for people to use to circumvent that kind of censorship. So of course it's going to be good for anyone that wants to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume if you're the US, you have, of course, the money printer, but if you're like North Korea or Venezuela or Iran, that other countries who want to or import stuff from, be it China or whatever, to get the machinery and whatever you need in your local economy, that they probably don't want to have your printed paper. And if you can't access the dollar system, possibly Bitcoin might be a way around it. I mean, I recall early Bitcoin talk discussions where this was debated in like 2011, 2012, long before. We are now at a stage where it's actually starting to become a reality. Even as, yeah, I think, Steve, you're right. That's probably right now still ready to drop in the bucket, but at least it has just the attention of everybody by now, while back in the day it was really probably just some fringe theories of some people on Bitcoin talk. Okay, any other questions on the geopolitical stuff, guys? Anybody?
I have a question that's kind of geopolitical, but more on just the price and basically the cost. So since we're kind of in a worldwide recession right now, at least a short or temporary one, who knows if we'll come out of it, and it's kind of affected demand for energy, right? But how much has that affected demand for the energy that otherwise would be could be used to power Bitcoin mining, and has that like flowed into changing the cost of Bitcoin mining for what you guys see?
Well, I'll just talk about what I know, which is oil field. It has affected oil field miners and to some degree, mainly for those of us, like for our company, for example, we have a mix of applications where we're on oil wells that have excess gas and waste gas, and then we're also on gas wells that are just stranded, like they cannot get to the market any other way. So those gas wells are not affected because they're not tied to oil price at all. The oil well options, though, are affected because the oil is what brings all the revenue to that site. So when it's not making any money, they shut it down, and then usually they're shutting the gas is going with it. So the thing though is that the fraction of hash power right now that's coming from oil field is relatively small. Like it's pretty, I would imagine, insignificant still. I think this is going to change over the next few years, but right now it's small. So I don't think, not at least in the oil side, there hasn't been a crazy, probably immeasurable change to the hash rate due to the oil price from oil field mining.
Yeah. Okay.
So from my side, some of the guys in Texas that I speak with, they mentioned that because of the oil wells shutting down, that they are expecting to see some interruptions over the next few months. But if demand comes back, then everything will kind of return to normal. And outside of there, at least in China, Russia, Kazakhstan, Asia, I would say no impact or next to no impact from the oil situation directly to Bitcoin mining.
Okay, and nothing from other changes in energy costs?
I mean, the obvious thing is for end of May until end of October, mining in Sichuan in China is extremely cheap compared to the rest of the year. So outside of that period, if you want to put some machines in China, you're probably paying around 5.5 cents for hosting. But for the 6 months coming now, it's going to be around 3 cents. So that's a significant change, but that's something that's predictable every single year with slight variation.
Got it. Cool.
So, okay, I think that was for like the geopolitical part. Let's start to dive a bit more like in the Bitcoin specific part and what role mining and so on plays there. First question there, you guys, as we mentioned before, both have gone to like the crypto econ from Eric Woskyle, which is like, for those who don't know, it's a bit like the breaking Bitcoin, what it is for like the technology side, like the code base. It's focused on like the economics behind Bitcoin to better understand what makes the system work. And you both joined the conference in Hanoi. What's the advantage? Why does it make sense for people in the Bitcoin mining space to have a good grasp on the economic side of Bitcoin? And yeah, what made you basically join the conference from Eric?
I guess my take on that is, well, I'm fascinated by everything around Bitcoin. I want to learn about as much as I can. I guess part of the value that comes out of, focusing on the economic side of it is, especially like with, at Eric's conference too, like he talks a lot, not just about the pure economics, but he calls it crypto economics. So like how the dynamics of mining incentives align, say with the greater Bitcoin economy. And I think for me, it's important to sort of have a bit of an understanding of how it's all working, because, as a miner, like us and Thomas, like we're investing a lot of capital into these projects. And that means, capital takes time to pay back. So having a comfortable understanding of how Bitcoin sort of works on the economic level is important to me, because if I'm making these decisions to dedicate my life and my capital and taking risks for Bitcoin, I got to be really, I'm trying to always see what's coming and try to understand what risks are at play, and I think paying attention to the economic story is part of that.
Yeah, so just a funny one. So back a few months ago when the event was happening in Hanoi, I had been in Vietnam, I don't know, for a month or 2 months, just hanging out, not really knowing anyone. And then I hear there's this motorcycle Bitcoin event in Vietnam. That was the day before. And I have a motorbike myself back in Beijing. So after being stranded for a while, it was nice to see such a cool event taking place. And it was a very good event, all of the speakers, it was a very high quality. So on the economic side, I mean, that's the core of mining. You have to understand it. You have to be able to forecast. The tools we have today are still pretty rough. When it comes to actually forecasting for a project and putting the CapEx down, you can't just look at the simple things such as the Bitcoin price, the current difficulty, and the performance of the machines, because there's a lot of unknowns. So the real world stuff we discussed, but also even things like the difficulty will increase over time, and kind of knowing what's happening in the markets, working out hedging strategies. Actually, the exchange FTX launched a hash rates futures contract last week, which is interesting. I definitely feel the industry direction is going that way, which is allowing miners to have ways to hedge their risk and prepare for their operations better. So, and I mean, apart from that, Bitcoin itself is built on an economic model which is very unique and different to the fiat currencies we're used to, and that's, I think, the very deep foundation of why a lot of us like Bitcoin. So it's imperative.
Okay, let's also get right into some of like, when it comes to Bitcoin mining and the economic attack vector, some of the most popular myths maybe floating around. One of them, like the 51% hash attack. What do you guys say about it? And yeah, what is the real danger behind it?
Sorry, Dominic, did you say the 51% attack? Is that what you said?
Yeah, it was about like the 51% mining hash power attack. What is the real danger behind it, from somebody working there at the front line, seeing like how the economic incentives play out?
maybe I will discuss from the mining pool side, because that's the side I know pretty well. So regularly, I get asked, or people discuss, they say there's a few mining pools, 2 or 3 mining pools combined, they own more than 51% of the network, and they could attack Bitcoin. It's a big threat. Now, firstly, I definitely personally believe that geographic decentralization of where the hash rate is a good thing, and who holds the coins is a good thing. But I do believe that is a bit of a myth. There's a few reasons for that. So let's say we took the top 3 mining pools right now, they probably would add up to around 55% of the Bitcoin hash rate. Now, one important thing is it is very easy to switch mining pools. So all of these mining machines, when you set them up and you connect to a pool, you actually choose pool 1, 2, 3. Of course, you could choose the same pool for each, but normally people have backup pools. But it really is a flick of a switch to go between pools. So in the case where someone was suspected of doing something malicious, in the age that we live, information moves fast, especially in the mining community. So I don't think the people with the power at the mining pool level would be able to execute on this kind of attack. At the same time, they're not incentivized to do that. They run the mining pool business, and if they were to do some kind of attack like that, it is destroying their own business, and it's attacking Bitcoin, and they're in the industry because they support Bitcoin. So in general, I'm not too concerned about that, but as I said, more decentralization is definitely a positive thing.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same. Like, if you own a restaurant and you start poisoning your patrons, like feeding them poisonous food, you're going to go out of business. Okay. You're probably going to go to jail too, but you're certainly going to go out of business. Miners are not any profit motivated Bitcoin miner is extremely unlikely to want to participate in something like that. Could there be some weird off chance where, some miners collude to try to reorganize blocks for some reason, maybe try to, try to just double spend somebody? I just don't see it happening because of the, like you said, like the incentives just aren't there for that. What the real threat though is like anything, who has the most motivation to attack? Because doing that kind of attack would be effectively a denial of service on the Bitcoin network. Like if I had 51% of the hash power, I'd have many options at my disposal. I could prevent any other miner from mining any blocks. So I just censor all your rewards, right? Or I could stop anybody from transacting on Bitcoin by mining only empty blocks and not letting any other blocks in, right? So you can do a full denial of service attack with that. So you sort of got to think about it. Okay, well, who would want to do that? Like, what entity might want to do that? And the only one that I can really think of that is at least a viable threat is basically the state. Like it's the state being those that benefit from something like Bitcoin not growing and taking hold. So that would be those who benefit from money printing and central banking. Those are the only entities I could conceivably, rationally see as being interested in doing a denial of service attack on Bitcoin. So that topic, and that's sort of a lot of the theme of that conference that we were talking about in Hanoi, is how the state views Bitcoin and what their incentives are. And they are very much incentivized in some, you can argue, to shut Bitcoin down because it offers alternatives to what they want, which is state money. So I do think it is something that is certainly possible, but we got to remember like who would be motivated to do it. And I don't think it's like F2 pool or any business around mining. The only way that F2 pool would ever participate in something like that is if they were, whoever has jurisdiction over that business, I'm guessing China, they would have to force them to do it. And that's really the only way I think that would ever happen. So the state is the threat, is basically the answer.
Okay, so let's paint out a different scenario there, where instead of just going there and outright like banning it, whatever, the state is coming in and start regulation step by step. Similar like what we have seen, maybe for example, like take the income taxes, which was like 3% like 100 years ago. It's now 50% or more in some places. If they would have gone overnight, the 50% probably would have been teared and feathered and shot and whatever. But doing it gradually over time somehow allowed the state to increase the rates over and over, and you never had enough people on the street basically to stop these things. So basically you use this boiling the frog tactic by slowly increase it so that there's never enough outrage to stop you from long-term going around your plans. And then coming back to Bitcoin, we see exchanges and so on start to get more and more regulated. Just like earlier this year, we also saw some new anti-money laundering rules and whatever, where basically exchanges now step by step, the regulated ones start asking you, okay, where are you sending these and these coins, or where are these coins coming from? Not allowing you to use privacy technologies like mixers and so on. So it seems to be on a way that like these regulated exchanges will soon maybe only allow for whitelisted addresses for withdrawals, where the party who you are sending it to is identified. Of course, once you have done this, at the moment you can still then just send your Bitcoins further. But could it be a viable threat that at some point also the state is coming in and regulating then like the mining farms and basically telling the miners like, you're only allowed to process transactions which go to this bunch of whitelisted addresses, and if you are sending to a not whitelisted address, we punish you. Is this a scenario you could think of how the state could work as a threat actor playing the long-term game there?
So, it's interesting because I was sending some Bitcoin from Coinbase to my friend's Binance account a few days ago, and I noticed there's a new box there at the withdrawal process, which is I have to declare if it's an exchange address or not. So that was something new that I've never seen before, but it's kind of in the direction that you're mentioning, Dominic. I think thankfully what you described, it would be hard for it to be executed and then have an impact because the mining is quite decentralized globally. So if a certain government was, it would really need coordination on the government level across countries, because of what you described of the scenario of certain transactions being censored and not being able to be processed. There is enough miners in various locations that eventually those transactions would go through. But even though I think that what you describe is unlikely, I think it is important we always do keep it in mind and be conscious of what's happening around us, and not let Bitcoin be taken over, as you described, by the income tax gradually and gradually.
Yeah, I mean, so on the topic of regulation, like we're only going to see more regulation. We won't see less. Like it just never seems to go that way, right? It's always more. So it's only going to get worse. The thing about regulation, though, is regulation never makes anything more efficient. It makes it less efficient. So, if they regulate mining pools, okay, for example, and slap on some big rules to F2 pool and, say that they have to abide by certain rules, well, that's just going to effectively incur a cost to F2 pool. F2 pool might eventually have to increase their fees to cover that cost. And now they become less competitive. Anyone else, any other pool that can circumvent those rules, don't have to bear that cost. And so they'll be more competitive. So the net is that regulation just pushes, like has a pressure towards, call it decentralization, or call it towards free market, or towards choice, basically. On the exchange side, you know, they can keep adding rules, make it harder and harder and harder for people to utilize exchanges, you know, for fiat on ramps and stuff. That's just going to that's going to add pressure for more peer-to-peer transactions, because that's what Bitcoin, of course, is all about, is peer-to-peer. Right now, you know, I would say, I'm going to guess that most new people that come into Bitcoin are not getting it peer-to-peer, like just buying it, let's say, off me or off Thomas. Maybe it is. Maybe we're at the point now where most new people are just getting it like peer-to-peer, but certainly a lot of people, especially in North America, get it from exchanges. That's how they first get involved. If they make that harder to do, well, it's going to make it more profitable for those of us who do have Bitcoin and who can still access the exchange to sell it peer-to-peer. So I don't see it. I don't see, and Bitcoin is really, if you sort of dig down, it's all about circumventing regulation. So I'm not really worried about regulation. I'm only worried about it in the sense of how it affects me and my business, because I'm, of course, going to comply with regulations as a business, but I don't see it hurting Bitcoin.
I just want to jump in. It gave me some food for thought. So the first thing is, you know, a lot of these mining operations nowadays, especially in US, Canada, and Europe, they do things properly. Like, they do run their businesses like a legitimate business, which is good. I would say on the other side of the world, it's still at the stage where there's even cases of people stealing electricity to mine or not paying taxes and so forth. So yeah, it's a very interesting one. On one hand, it's good that there is some form of regulation and business is done in a proper way, but we just have to, keep an eye on things like censorship of transactions and things.
Yeah, we have to acknowledge that you don't have to abide by regulation if you don't want to. You'll just be as we say, a black market miner. I know people in North America stealing power doing it. Not at any major scale, but like, you know, at a reasonable, for like individuals, like, you know, they're stealing a lot of value worth of power. So, I mean, yeah, regulation, all it does is punish the honest people, and the dishonest people, the people that don't abide by the regulation, they actually benefit from it. The more regulation, the better, because all their competition has incurred greater costs. So.
And just one more, which is China. It's so interesting, I have to say. I'm lucky because I am based there and I can speak a bit of Mandarin, but we always see the news about China banning Bitcoin crypto mining. Now, people in China can exchange hundreds of thousands of dollars of crypto for renminbi to their bank account, and they don't get flagged. You know, we can't even do that in the US or in Australia, right? So it's like so fascinating how on the outside it looks like China is so heavily regulated, but actually the in and out flows of OTC deals is just so huge. So it's interesting.
No, I fully share the sentiment. From my experiences, like here in Vietnam, where not even necessarily talking about Bitcoin, but generally it's much easier to use cash for a lot of things, where like in the West, if you even come with like 5,000 euro or something, or $5,000 into your bank, they look at you very suspiciously and where did you get these $5,000 from? Did you sell some drugs or whatever? And actually just last night, I got also a bank account shut down for a Bitcoin sale of like 1,000 euro. The opposite party, for not so smart reasons, wrote buy Bitcoin on the transaction purpose. The bank flagged it. Boom. And I had this bank account for 20 years. It's my oldest bank account, which I ever had. I was not even 18. And just a transfer of like 1,000 euro Bitcoin was enough. Boom, gone. We don't want you anymore. So yeah, I fully share the sentiment. In Vietnam and a lot of these places, definitely freer than in the West on these matters. Okay, any follow-up question on this? Actually, I think I might have another one. I mean, what you just said regarding like China, Vietnam, these kind of markets being a bit more open. Could it be that it evolves then a bit like similar to the traditional banking system and so on, where you have all these international agreements regarding anti-money laundering and what the banks have to do with compliance here and there, whatever? where you have then all your institutions. There's the banks, and in the Bitcoin sector, it's then like the miners, the exchanges, whatever. You have to comply with these international rules, and if you, as on a country level, don't enforce it enough, that you start kind of putting economic sanctions on it. I mean, basically, the similar playbook like you have it right now with the traditional financial system. That if whatever specific banks or specific countries don't enforce like these anti-money laundering rules properly in their country, then they get economic sanctions, they get cut off SWIFT, and all these kind of games there. You see that long term something similar could play out in Bitcoin if you don't regulate like your miners, that they don't process transactions to whitelisted or not blacklisted like addresses in efficiently on your territory, that you get basically sanctioned for it.
Sorry, Dominic, that was quite long. So what was the question exactly?
I'm basically that international regulation, of course not overnight, will follow like the playbook which already exists for like the traditional financial system. So that you just piece by piece make sure that all of the countries within your sphere of influence follow these routes. And if there's too much money laundering going on, or then in the case of Bitcoin, if there's too much transaction processing to not whitelisted addresses or whatever going on, if you don't police your mining farms and exchanges properly, that you get sanctioned for it on the international level with, whatever. You can't sell your stuff anymore here or things like this.
Well, let me just share a few things. So firstly, in regards to government involvement in Bitcoin mining, in most cases I've seen in developing countries, it's more like the government wants to take some kind of tax, some kind of cut or impose a heavy tax on the electricity. So I still think we're quite far away from what you described. As Stephen mentioned earlier, Bitcoin is still very small. It means a lot for us, but in the grand scheme of things, it's still very small. I don't think it's hugely on the radar of most countries. The one interesting thing will be various countries building some kind of digital currency. So I think we've probably all seen China has launched some kind of beta version of the DCEP token. Obviously in the US, Facebook is building Libra, which is now renamed to Novi or something. It will be interesting to see what comes out of these government-backed digital currencies and how it interacts with Bitcoin. For me, it's still a bit early. I'm not sure, but going to be watching it.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I think they're going to continue with the AML, like advancing that playbook, like of just more surveillance and more doing whatever they can to control, to maintain control and to gain control of all financial trade, right? Of all trade. That's sort of what the state does. Like that's sort of why they exist. They exist to regulate, basically tax and siphon off wealth in return of governing, whether or not that's generally a good thing or not. But yeah, I think they're going to continue with it. So like we were talking previously, I don't think Bitcoin is, they can capture Bitcoin like they've captured other monies like gold. I don't think it's, they can certainly attempt to do it, but it is simply just code that anybody can run on any computer. So for them to entirely capture it like they have with gold, I doubt they'll do that. I mean, if they want to capture the hash rate, for example, they have to, go after all the big miners and stuff, which they can easily do. But once they do that, it just creates incentive to split up, to disperse, I guess you could say, the hash power even further and make it harder to do. Example, if they were to do that, it might actually make mining at home a lot more profitable. And then more people would do it, and it'd be hard for them to stop it. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but yeah, they're just going to continue. They're going to continue the playbook. They're going to continue trying to control things. I don't think they'll have a lot of success in the long term.
Okay, so we start to get a bit over an hour here. Okay, we started a bit late, but let's get to maybe the last 3 questions or so. Bitcoin halving was like a big topic, of course, over the past month, and also again, as we heard over the last couple of years, at various instances, the Bitcoin mining death spiral. Anything you guys want to say about this topic?
You know, both of these topics are extremely complex and interesting topics that we could spend hours talking about. What can I say? Okay, death spiral is bullshit, to say very clearly. That's one of the beautiful things about Bitcoin is how the network protocol adjusts. We have a difficulty adjustment every 2 weeks. So if suddenly lots of machines are going offline, eventually it will adjust. And again, sure, maybe those 2 weeks will be extended longer because less blocks are being mined in every 10 minutes. But we've seen, we've had big drops, right? End of 2018, we had a huge drop in the Bitcoin price down to about 3K. And then March 12, 2020, lost 50% in a matter of days, related to the global economy and even the halving. So all of these things resulted in mining revenue essentially being halved. And in all of these cases, we've bounced back. And that is the beautiful thing about Bitcoin.
Yeah, the death spiral argument's really silly. It's sort of like, I don't know, in oil field, like if the oil price drops and everybody just keeps producing the same amount of oil, like why would that doesn't happen? If profitability drops, people stop producing. And of course, Bitcoin, the adjustment is what, like you said, regulates that. It regulates the revenue per effort, like per work done. So yeah, that one's ridiculous. It's sort of obviously false, and then that's anyone that there's like a lot of prominent people, actually, like people with reputations that you think they wouldn't want to destroy, that talk about that, and it like that push that narrative, and it's absolutely silly. You said one other one. I don't know what other. There was another one you said, but I forgot what it was.
Halving.
Oh, the halving. Yeah. Well, I mean, the halving is just like a price drop. Price drops 50%. That's like the halving, like dropping your block reward 50%. Disregarding the fee revenue, but we've seen price drops of like 50% plenty of times, and we've seen 3 halvings now, and the hash rate looks like it's trending down a little bit, but it's just adjusting, and it's going to get to that point where miners are happy again, and that's really it. There's not much more to talk about on those
I just quickly, with the halving, it's like it's been the hottest topic for the last 6 to 8 months. So it's not a surprise to any miner. And those miners that are understanding the economical side and planning early will obviously do well. Actually, I think it would be interesting to hear from Steve more about the actual business model, because Steve is doing something different to a lot of the big names that are in the media who are doing big operations, new gen machines. Actually, Steve, he's using older machines that are optimized and building out some hardware himself. It's just a totally different game. And I think this is something very interesting you can share, Steve.
Sure. Yeah, so you're talking about like I guess when we were chatting, like I still buy S9s. I'm like, it doesn't seem like, based on where the prices are at and they keep dropping, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of demand for them right now. But my business is, the way I position my business, like the way I can explain it is like this. Like, first of all, I'm not an oil and gas producer. I don't own any oil and gas properties yet. I'm sort of looking, I want to do that, but we'll see if I get there later this year. But for the last 3 years, I haven't owned any oil and gas properties. So I have no problems. Like, I don't have any problems associated with these oil properties. So the people with the problems, with the energy problems, right? If you own the hydro dam and you're just letting half your potential energy just flow down the river, Or if you're own an oil and gas property and you're letting, half your potential energy go up in flames, like literally in a flare stack, you have a problem. So I've positioned my business to help the people with problems, just like any service provider, anyone that builds a product that has demand. So I just build Bitcoin mines for these guys. I also, like, we mine ourselves. Like, so my model sort of is like this, like I will build out the gen sets, so to create the electricity off the gas, build out the data centers and fill them out with ASICs, like older stuff usually. And so basically exclusively S9s is what we've been using. And I will deploy it on a site and help out the producer with their problem. But it's always for sale. Like, as soon as they want to buy it off me, I sell it to them, get all my capital back, go build more, get more out there. They're the ones that have the problem, because they're the ones that benefit the most. Like when I'm on their site, if it's my equipment, then they're trialing, for example, because a lot of these guys, you can imagine if you're an old guy that's been just working oil his whole life, like convincing him to buy a Bitcoin mine isn't like something he's just going to do right away. But they are interested in it because it's money. They want to, it's another option to make money. Okay, so they're interested. But the way I get them to eventually, snap their fingers and buy it is they want to try it first. So I put my own stuff out there on their site. They give us a great deal, like usually free energy, and then we just pay maintenance or something like that on the gen set. And then as soon as they're willing to buy it off of us, we sell it to them. And if they're not willing to buy it off of us, someone else might want to, and I'll sell it to them and I'll ship it over to their site. So the way I do it is we're just a service provider. And so in that sense, we're not any different than most businesses. One mistake I think I see a lot of people making in this industry is, some capital is coming in, building out Bitcoin mines to own and mine themselves and not be a service provider to these guys that have the problem. That might work short term. I don't see it working long term, because just the way to look at it is, like, if you own that oil property and you have to shut it in because you can't get rid of your gas, you have a huge incentive to pay someone some money to get rid of your gas. And so they not only do they earn revenue in Bitcoin mining, and so the base economics of, like, this Bitcoin mine costs this much, this is how long it pays out, but they also have the other side, which is now they can increase their oil production because they bought this Bitcoin mine, or they can turn the tap back on because they put the Bitcoin mine there. So it has a net, almost you could call it like a negative cost. It's not really negative, but it's just an opportunity cost that this resolves. So there, and then, I've talked about this a fair bit, but like the reason I do S9s, like in old hardware, is partly because of that. Like they're not investing in these mines just for the payout. They're investing in it to get rid of their problem. So it's not actually that important, that if they go with new gen or older gen, and of course the new gen, a big part of that is the new gen hardware, like a Watts miner, costs a lot more per kilowatt than an S9. So they can solve their problem at a lot cheaper cost by just buying the oldest stuff. And it still pays itself off eventually. It might take a bit longer than maybe the newer stuff in the long term, but it seems to be what makes sense for these guys.
And the reason I feel it's interesting is just because 99% of other people with S9s are looking to sell. And especially with the halving, it was a common conception that, S9s are obsolete and they're dead. So I find it interesting because someone can take those unwanted goods and then actually use them and ROI on them. So that's why I find it's interesting.
Yeah, and a big factor too that is hard for a lot of new people, like guys that ask for quotes and stuff to get their heads wrapped around, or at least I have to explain it to them, is you're in the middle of nowhere. Like if you deploy one of my mines, there's a good chance it's in the middle of nowhere, and there's no one that can get to that site for, like, if there's an issue, like if you see an alarm, like your hash rate's down, or there's an alarm from our system, you're not going to be able to get there for probably a couple hours in a lot of cases. So So there's always that risk of theft, right? So having the newest, most expensive hardware in these data centers that are extremely remote the risk profile is sort of edgy, right? Like you might, all it takes is one theft to really throw back your operation. So that's the thing about S9s. They're so cheap that if they're stolen or if they're if a truck backs up and destroys the data center, which we've actually had happen, then it's not that much capital that's been destroyed, right? So.
Okay. One of the last questions. What do you think is like those misunderstood, misconceptualized points in your industry? What people don't understand?
That's a good question. I think there's two angles on that. Like there's within our industry, like so guys like us are within Bitcoin. I think the most misunderstood is the security model. Sort of we touched on that already, like the incentives of a 51% attack and who the real threat is and how might Bitcoin resist censorship when it does happen, like when, for example, the state might come in and try to resist it or attack it. And that's exactly, of course, what Eric Voskill's conference in Hanoi was really all about. So I won't rehash everything that we learned there, but I think the security mechanism is mostly is widely misunderstood within the Bitcoin space, like the people that have been in it for years. The new people, though, I just get all kinds of questions from new people, like everything is new. So I often like, what's the halving? How's that going to be a problem? People don't even know that you can divide Bitcoin into like multiple 100 million units. So yeah, there's a ton of misunderstanding still in the newbies, but that's to be expected.
Yeah, so I think all the ones that Steve mentioned, I think for people who are in the industry, especially in the Bitcoin side, the death spiral thing, it keeps coming up. And the other thing I would mention, it's a very small thing, but just the fact that the way the network hash rate is calculated, it's basically calculated based on the number of blocks mined at the whole network level over a period of time. Every time there's a bit of volatility in that, people go to all these like really wild conclusions that, the network hash rate is at 150 exahash and then it's down to 60. But actually, this is the natural fluctuations. I mentioned this one just because it comes up so much on crypto Twitter. But what I do and our team does for analysis is compare all of the pools, the different pool hash rate, the top 15 pools, compare that with the blocks mined, and then find a number which makes sense of both parts. Because nowadays, we don't actually have unknown miners. At periods of time, there's large mining farms who don't use a pool and mine blocks themselves. But right now, I think 100% of the blocks are mined through a pool. So if you actually look at the hash rate stats from each pool, we do have to assume that they're providing factual information. But since they're PPS pools, most likely they are, you can have a better indication. So I just think people, when they're looking at this mining data, can choose better sources.
Okay. What do you see right now as one of like the major trends in the Bitcoin mining space coming up over the next halving period, or maybe like where do we stand in terms of Bitcoin mining in 10 years from now? So Bitcoin is now a bit older than 10 years. Where do we stand in 10 years?
I will briefly touch on a couple of things because individually they're very deep topics. So first thing is the next 6 months, China has the hydro season, power is cheap. There's going to be more and more machines deployed. Even if the Bitcoin price remains at the same level, I would still expect hash rate to go up just because of those cheap prices available. Second thing, now that margins get tighter and tighter, more and more people need to find ways to optimize their miners. So whether it's custom firmware, which a number of third parties are working on, whether it's some kind of immersion cooling, but then again, that has high CapEx costs. I think the point being, people are just going to find ways to optimize just to get a little bit more efficiency out of their operations. And then the last thing, I'm seeing a trend of all of these financial products. So whether it's hash rate futures, some kind of hedging products, I think even just, I see more and more people talking about the value of a hash rate and buying and selling that. So these are three things I think we'll see in the next few months.
Yeah, I'm excited to see, just, as someone purchasing ASICs, like I'm excited to see them become more commoditized. Watts Miner is really giving Bitmain a good competition. And I'm sure there'll be more competition coming, like more ASIC options in the future. So I'm excited to see that, because the closer an older generation hardware is to newer generation, the more commoditized the computers are. That's just good for everybody, because it just means it's more competition. There's less capex. Like historically, a lot of the capex has been in the ASICs themselves. So especially for my business and oil field, because it's already extremely capital intensive before you buy the ASICs, right? Because we're talking about the power plant too. The cheaper these ASICs get, it'll, I think, even drive like applications like our own, like an oil field, even further. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited to eventually upgrade and buy like Watts miners when they're actually cheap. Yeah, ASIC commoditization, and of course I'm very biased speaking on behalf of the oil field, but I really think most of the world's energy is in fossil fuels right now, and I don't really see any good reason to think that's going to change in the next 20 years. Despite the narratives that renewables are taking over, but they've been actually saying that for over 20 years. So I don't see fossil fuels going away, and where they are right now, there's so much waste in fossil fuel energy production that Bitcoin can help. So that's why I think, that's why I'm positioning my business to take advantage of that over the next decade. So that's where I think the hash rate is going to largely increase in that side of the industry for sure.
Okay, then one very last question, not directly related to the mining, but in a way we are all kind of affected by it, increasing social media censorship. I know that, Steve, your Twitter account, the company account, somehow has vanished. We also, like, our community page, the Bitcoin Saigon page, is like banned across all Facebook products, so you can't share a link to the bitcoinsaigon.org anymore on Facebook, on Instagram. Not even in a direct message, they just block it for whatever reason. So obviously our industry is also kind of affected by it. And we talked about like mining, fossil fuels and so on. Just this week, big news, Michael Moore's documentary also has been kicked off YouTube because it doesn't go along with the narrative. Anything you want to say about like where this might be going regarding like social media censorship and so on? Given that we are working right now here, everybody in our area on, separating money and state, how do we go about, voicing our opinions in the future?
I'll start. I think all signs show that censorship on social media has been increasing, especially in North America, like Facebook and Twitter. I think that is probably just going to get worse. Although, of course, you might have seen in the U.S., I think just yesterday, Donald Trump signed like an order about digging into that and trying to prevent that kind of call it publishing, or like the platforms like Twitter and Facebook actually, picking and choosing what messages are allowed to be, what narratives are allowed to be perpetuated. So I'm not surprised that they've, like, your business as a Bitcoin exchange, they've censored. I think we'll see more of that. Like even the Canadian government is sort of our tax agencies, just because I'm a Bitcoin company, they've already treated me, I call it, in a discriminatory fashion, which has costed us money, and I'm expecting more of that in the future. So, yep, that's sort of what we have to deal with, I think, as Bitcoin related businesses, and it basically, it's going to hurt everybody. You know, anyone that's trying to just run a legitimate, honest, like white market business. But like I said, it's only bad for us honest guys. It doesn't matter to the dishonest guys. So
I haven't been affected personally, but yeah, definitely noticing more and more on Twitter and other social media sites of more and more censorship happening. Hopefully we just congregate around decentralized tools that allow us to give our voice. I'm not too sure the direction it's heading, but at least from the mining industry, I think most of the socialization does take place on Twitter, and it also takes place on Telegram. So a lot of high quality Telegram groups allow for good discussion. So yeah, well, just everyone has to be aware of it, and I think we'll move to places where we can voice our opinions.
Dom, I gotta run.
Yep.
Hey, Dom.
Yep. We start to get quite okay. That was a very interesting 90 minutes now with Thomas and Steve. We got quite a few insights now into the world of Bitcoin mining, and yeah, thank each of you guys for the time, especially Steve waking up this early in the morning. 7 or 8 a.m. I think something like this in Alberta right now.
Sorry, what
Yeah.
was the question? Oh, okay.
Just like the time early in the morning right now where you are, right?
Yeah, it's not that bad. I just didn't realize what time it was, but
Okay. Anyway, it was very interesting. Yeah, so thanks again for joining, putting a bit of spotlight on like an underappreciated industry, which is actually a core pillar that makes the Bitcoin system work, the mining industry. And yeah, I mean, we will put all your links and everything into the show notes that you're also going to publish after this one. And yeah, otherwise, I think let's call it a night, or in case of Steve, like early morning. And yeah, hope to see you guys around. And Eric put maybe something up again. He mentioned something maybe next year Hanoi again, or whatever else place after the two Corona. So, thank you very much, Steve. Thank you very much, Thomas. Hope to see you around in the next week. From you place.
Awesome. Thank you guys for hosting us. It was a lot of fun. And I will be flying to Saigon tomorrow morning, so we can catch up if you guys have time.
yeah, thanks a lot. Good talking to you guys again.
All right, thanks.